My name is Bill Krim. I'm the president and CEO of United Way of Salt Lake. We joined here today with United Way of Northern Utah and United Way of Utah County in our annual legislative preview event. Typically, this has been a breakfast. It's been an event where we can come together and learn together about what our legislative leaders and other legislators, our governor, sees as the path forward in our state, the way to strengthen opportunity for everyone. Sadly, we're not able to do that in person, but we've come up with what we hope will be an opportunity to hear from even more legislators, to hear more ideas, to get more perspective, and to share that perspective over a longer period of time through a series of interviews that will take the place of this year's legislative preview breakfast. I'm excited to get going and to introduce you to those legislators. But I want to take a minute just to share a little bit about the work that United Way does in our community and invite you to join us. For those of you that love to tweet, you can join the conversation on Twitter by following United Way of Salt Lake at UWSL. You can also use the hashtag Utah Kids First or the hashtag UTPOL or UTED. Please join us. For the past 10 months, we've been battling a pandemic that has taken too many of our loved ones, too many of our community members, caused too many people in our community to lose their jobs, to have their businesses shut down. There has been deep pain over the last 10 months. But COVID has also shed a light on deep systemic inequities that were present before. That have been always in front of us, but maybe not always seen as clearly as we've seen them over the last 10 months. United Way of Salt Lake believes that going back to the status quo pre-pandemic is not where we need to be. And we know that our legislative leaders, our state leaders, our new governor share the view that we can come out of the pandemic with a better community, a stronger state, a world in which opportunity is more equitably provided to everyone living in our state, and that we can be stronger than we were going in. That is our goal, and that is what brings us here to this effort. We're working closely with all of our partners, with state leaders, local governments, with schools, community members, to reimagine what the future can look like, to reimagine schools and healthcare, childcare, our economic opportunities. We're exploring questions about what it will take to have a truly inclusive community. And we know that some of the changes that need to happen will take time. But the coming legislative session is an opportunity to take important steps towards that inclusive future. During the 2021 legislative session, United Way will focus on ensuring that the progress we've made to date continues. We know that our state has had a challenge this year, but important investments have been made in preschool and extended day kindergarten and mental health and Medicaid that need to continue. We also know that we need to focus on policies that meet the moment right now, that there are too many kids for whom the pandemic has had a tremendous detriment to their educational opportunity. Too many kids that have been disconnected, too many families who don't have access to the internet or didn't at the beginning, to broadband that would allow them to take full advantage of learning opportunities. We know that we have to find and connect and support every kid. We know that we have to help nonprofit community organizations support families. We know that we have to help teachers in this incredibly challenging time. And beyond meeting the moment for the coming months and years, we know that we have to lay the foundation, as I said, for an inclusive recovery going forward. And all of those things will be part of this year's legislative session. The videos we have for you today will feature a number of legislators talking about the upcoming legislative session and addressing the issues that we have been highlighting here in this introduction. But before we get started, I want to thank our generous lead sponsor, Chevron, who for 14 years has made it a priority to help provide this opportunity to those of us in Utah. I want to give Brian Stock, General Manager of Chevron's refinery here in Salt Lake, the opportunity to say a few words.
Hi, my name is Brian Stock, and I'm the General Manager at the Chevron refinery in North Salt Lake. I assumed my role here at the refinery just this fall, so I'm a new face at the legislative preview, but I've spent many years in Utah previously, and I'm really excited to return to this state. My wife and I really love Utah, and I appreciate the collaborative and can-do spirit of the people living here, especially in challenging times like these. Although I wish I could meet you all in person, I do want to thank Bill Krim and the United Way team for being agile in planning this preview. We're all learning new ways to stay connected to one another. Health is obviously a top priority for everyone right now, and I really appreciate the United Way's commitment to keeping our community safe. We're proud to be a community partner with resources that can help. We know that many people and organizations are struggling due to COVID-19, and that's why we've coordinated with local food banks, first responders, and educators to provide PPE, hand sanitizer, and other resources that can help manage the pandemic. We're also proud of our partnership with the United Way of Salt Lake on its Stay Safe, Stay Connected initiative and Reimagine Education Challenge to create more equitable classrooms along the Wasatch Front. 2020 shined a light on many social inequities, including those wrought by COVID-19. The first value in the Chevron Way is our commitment to diversity and inclusion, both in our workplace and in the communities in which we operate. Now more than ever, it's important that we come together to build a future that's inclusive of everyone and that provides clean air for us all to breathe. As we kick off the new year, that's why we're excited to celebrate our 1-year anniversary of producing Tier 3 fuel for Utah drivers. We don't just do business here, we live here, and we mean it when we say that as part of the community, we are committed to helping address Utah's air quality concerns. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks to the legislators for sharing their insights with us. I truly hope you enjoy the event.
Thanks again to Chevron, and thank you to our major sponsor, America First Credit Union, and our supporting sponsor, Rocky Mountain Power. Without the generosity of all of these sponsors, we would not be able to do this. Thank you.
You have some businesses that are thriving. Some businesses are having the best years they've ever had. You look at tech. Tech has done phenomenally well. And then you look at other industries that have just been decimated. The restaurant industry. I mean, there are many of these that really have been challenged. And part of the reason, of course, is the ability, right? For some people, it's been easy to go to a remote, move to an online remote platform and be able to continue to do their job and not miss a beat. For those that are working on the front lines, many of them, they haven't had that option to be able to just go remote. And then with shutdowns and other things that happened early on, we really had a tough time with big sections of our economy. I believe the legislature did see the concern with that and stepped up pretty big with some of the CARES Act money, where we were able to provide some assistance for many of those types of companies. I think there will still be a desire to continue to provide support for industries that have been hit really hard.
I'm hoping with the vaccines on the way, we're going to start to see very, very slow revival over this year of these industries. But in the meantime, anything that we can do to be able to support, particularly these small businesses in this area, we need to do to help make sure they're able to get to the time that growth returns for them.
If we're looking at business, the immigrant-owned businesses, we're looking at here in Utah in 2014, about $250 million were brought into Utah by entrepreneurs, immigrant entrepreneurs, with about 32,000 employees. And so that's a different question, is what are the impacts to business, minority-owned and women-owned businesses?
I think one of the things that the pandemic has revealed really clearly is something that we've been talking about for a long time, but that shows up in spades here. And that is, there's a much more significant harmful impact on vulnerable communities, minority communities. We need greater resources for individuals who either don't speak English at all or have English as their second language. We need greater resources to specifically target women who are working, single mothers, single women who have been hit hardest because of job losses across the country and across the state. We need more affordable options for childcare for working families, either single parents or individuals who are family members where you have parents working 2 and 3 jobs. These are the people who are struggling the most to really figure out a way to make it through this crisis for them.
Our economy is where it is because we've had about $400 million of influx of funding from the federal government, and we need to be conscious that those amounts of money are potentially not going to be there next year. I mean, we may have some. So that amount of money needs to somehow reflect as we move forward in terms of our budget conversation and how we then bring policies that are going to strengthen our economy. So for me, it will be policies related to food security, housing security, childcare security, and of course, education for our kids, because if parents cannot feel comfortable and safe where their kids are going to be after school, or what's happening with their kiddos at school, or if they can leave them for childcare, there's no way they can, be back into the economy fully integrated. And that's, I think, one of my biggest concerns that we haven't necessarily addressed. We're just in a reactionary emergency mode, which is, of course, due to the pandemic, but we need to be more proactive in addressing what keeps families secure enough to get back into the economy and make sure that they're healthy and their kids are okay, so they can get more integrated.
Most people cannot afford childcare. Some people live in a community where there's a childcare desert. There is no access to affordable or high quality childcare in the area. So I think that is one of the major things that we're going to have to look at, or we should be looking at in as policymakers. How do we assure that when I leave for work, when I go to work, that my child is taken care of, so I am able to work and put in that time to be able to take care of my family. Another big issue we're having in our community, there's been a number of people who have had to go online to fill out applications or to fill out for different services from the state, but they don't have access to the internet. They don't have access to computers to be able to do that. So just two of the many things that I think as a legislative body we're going to have to look at and we've got to address if we're going to start breaking down barriers so everyone could participate in the economy.
There's economic and health disparities that this pandemic has really highlighted that we've seen across the state. And we've got a number of lawmakers, including members of House leadership, working on several different bills to address how we can address sort of the social and economic inequities that we see the citizens of the state dealing with right now. And just to give you kind of a flavor of what some of those look like, Representative Hawks and Senator Milner are working on really redefining our economic development strategy as a state and moving into a different type of incentive portfolio for businesses as they think about moving here or expanding their businesses here, and really doing that in a way where there's more of a benefit for Utahns and less of a benefit for these companies that are moving in out of the state. In particular, how do we align our incentives for business to be more focused on workforce development and educational opportunities and alignment, as well as how do we align our incentives for businesses to create infrastructure that's going to help us manage the growth in the state.
By taking care of the most vulnerable, we're also conferring significant benefit on those who are less vulnerable. We're improving the quality of life for everyone in this state. And there's tremendous advantage and benefit that comes by making sure that those who are in the greatest need are taken care of first, and that our resources are allocated most effectively to address their needs.
One of the things we need to do, I think most, is to be able to fund education. And you saw what we did in December. As we gave additional money and committed additional money to education, we actually reinstated the 6% WPU, which means a 6% increase for education funding, which we actually funded last year, but then we had to reduce it because of the pandemic. We also committed to give teachers a $1,500 bonus, and I think we need to take care of those educators that are trying to do their best to educate our children. They're having to do it online and in person. And the other thing that we need to do is make sure that we can get kids in school in person. And we're seeing that that's more effective. And I think as we enter the legislative session, we'll be encouraging both teachers to teach in person, but also trying to fund education so that we have the capacity to be able to take care of their kids. There's nothing I think more important than taking care of our children and making sure that they have a great education.
As we try to recover economically, we should also think about recovering the academic loss for our students. And that can only be accomplished by making sure that we give some high-level quality instruction to go forward, so that if there are gaps in the learning, that we help cover those gaps and help our children get back on track for where they would have been had it not been for the pandemic and the consequences that they've suffered as a result of that, through no fault of their own.
Well, the first thing we've got to do is make sure that all of our kids are actually back in school. And we've seen, just as an example, some really concerning numbers out of the Salt Lake School District, where there's a 7-fold increase of children failing this year. And there's 1,000 students that have really become unaccounted for just in that one school district. And that's happening all across the state to a lesser degree, but it's happening in other places. We've got to make sure these kids get back in the classroom. We have been notified and will be receiving some additional money from the federal government related to COVID. And a lot of that's going to be flowing into our public school system. I think it's really incumbent on us and a real responsibility that we have to use that money first and foremost to help us get these kids caught up from being disrupted since last March in terms of their education.
We know that with our kids, there's a window of opportunity that's relatively narrow and small. I mean, if you take a couple or 3 years out of a preschooler, not a preschooler's, but a K through 12 child's education, it can have an impact that is very, very hard to overcome. And so I think that we've got to be aware of, educate ourselves about what kind of negative impact being taken out of school or not having the kind of learning experiences that they would have before the pandemic hit. Different school districts have handled these things differently across the state, and I think it's important that they be allowed the latitude to make the best decisions that they can based on information that's important for them and that they think is the best reflection of science and facts. But I also think, again, we've got to have greater resources targeted to the vulnerable communities within the school districts that, we've got our Title I schools, and they're the ones who I think really we should be focusing our greatest level of resources towards.
We need to find ways to close what I think has been a learning gap. And that learning gap in terms of where we expected students to be at this point in time versus where they are. So looking at enhanced summer enrichment programs, after school programs, and other opportunities that we can assess where students are now. What are the particular areas that they need help and support in, so we can catch them up to their grade level and the education outcomes that we expect for them.
There's some critical grade levels, like for instance, if we know if students aren't reading by 4th grade, they're likely to struggle the rest of their school. We know that there are some classes in junior high school and some skills that are essential for them to be successful in high school. So I do hope that the legislature and the state board of education, because it's a shared responsibility with the local school boards, that we do have some opportunities this summer for students to maybe go to summer school, if you will, and catch up on those things.
One of the things that I think we can do as a legislature is look for ways to provide that additional support, whether that be after school, whether that be through the summer, to make sure that we're not losing them, that we're not getting further behind. And ideally, it would be great if not only can we help them stay at grade level, but help them thrive during the summers or after school. And I think that'll do more than anything else, getting them back up to speed, getting them at the same level. That will help them not just for this year, but for every year going forward. I know for my wife as a teacher, she'll have a few kids that get behind, and some of them, English is a second language for them. They get even further behind during their summers and after school. And for my wife, that means as a teacher, she's now having to spend, quite a bit of her time working with these 2 or 3 students, and at sometimes the detriment of being able to work with the rest of the class. And so if there's ways that we can help support those students that are falling behind and providing these additional resources, not only will it help that student, but it actually will help the education for the rest of the students in those classes.
One of my biggest priorities is keeping them healthy. So we need to address a way of talking about all of our kiddos being covered and having access to quality care, healthcare. We've learned that the pandemic hits in so many ways, and children also can be affected from a healthcare perspective when it comes to that pandemic. But at the same time, we also need to address their education gaps, and those are real. I mean, there's no way we can believe that, finishing a school year prior to what was expected, moving into an online education without having an infrastructure was not going to affect the outcome of the education achievement of our kiddos. So I worry that unfortunately many kids that are already disproportionately being impacted by social determinants of health and income gaps and achievement gaps are now going to see this bigger gap. We need to talk about after school programs as an opportunity to bring education and help the education gap. We need to talk about childcare and high quality, adequate childcare. So kids that are still struggling, especially the younger ones, preschool, high quality preschool and early childhood education are critical. So I'm hoping that because we've seen it firsthand, and because many, especially of our elected officials across the state, not only the state legislators, but local government officials have kids there of their own, and they've now been facing this because, of course, the pandemic hit. It was an equal opportunity, impact to everyone. That they realize that if it's difficult for them, it's going to be even more difficult for families that have other issues that were already there. High quality, evidence-based after-school programming, those are critical in our state for families, especially working families, to make sure they have a place where their kids can go after school. Most jobs do not end at 3 p.m. Most people have to work more hours, and it makes it really hard when you don't know when your kid is, if they're safe, if they're having good programs that can help them strengthen their academics, but also their social interactions. And so there's a lot of benefits to having high quality evidence-based after school programs. Right now, we need them more than ever. And we have an opportunity with great partners to make that happen.
One of the things that I think is important is paraeducators. In a school, it's a community. It's really a map of our system and the neighborhoods around it. And paraeducators are helpers. They're in the classroom, and teachers need that. Everybody needs to be on the same page to make sure those classrooms work effectively and every child can be taught. We need more people in the classroom, one-on-one, helping those children.
We need to start talking about the social determinants of education and what pieces that make for a safe environment for our kids to thrive in. We need to talk about resiliency and how do we model and how do we educate our kids to be resilient. And we're going to see resiliency with our students in this year and the next year. We're going to see it in different ways and in incredible ways. And how can we take these lessons and continue to help our students to thrive? We know that early childhood education and preschool, extended daycare education, we know that these have great impacts into the success of our students. And as a policymaker, we need to be serious about how we can optimize those benefits. We can't only look at educational and academic benefits, because there's so much more to our kids than grades. There's the resiliency piece and teaching our kids how to thrive, how to navigate this world in a place where we may not have all of the answers all of the time. And we certainly saw that this year.
I worked in the classroom for 20 years in first grade, and I saw the very first day the children that had preschool, that had a guidance at home, that had those skills. They came in ready for work. They came in ready to work in those schools, and they were prepared. Those that didn't, they were behind months. Yes, we could work with them, but they were always behind. Preschool is so important. They're ready. Their minds are ready to absorb everything at that early age, and they're socialized. That's really important too. When you come, you have the educational component and the socialization, and they work together for a rounded student.
So what we know in the state of Utah is that only about 50% of our students reach proficiency in reading at the end of third grade. For me, that's not acceptable, because reading is a fundamental skill to success later in public education, and if they choose to go on to higher education. What we also know is that how a student does in first grade and in kindergarten, how ready they are to learn, is probably the single biggest indicator of whether or not they're going to reach third grade reading proficiency. We need to continue to invest in pre-K options for our kids. We need to continue to have online learning available. We need to have site-based pre-K programs. We need to have options for parents. And we need to embed it in daycare programs. So for me, we need to have options for parents to help their children come to kindergarten ready. And that's only going to happen where we're able to provide for students who need it pre-K access and opportunity.
Quality of life is going to improve dramatically if we have the best education that we can have for our kids, starting as early as it's feasible to do. And this is especially true in areas where economic opportunities are more scarce, in our rural areas, in our underserved areas, in terms of communities that, again, have two working parents and parents who may not speak English as a first language. So it all ties together in a way that's really, really important and critical. And we need businesses to step up and help out, quite honestly. We need more companies to provide daycare services. We need more employers to help single moms and single dads who have primary responsibility for seeing to it that their kids get the education that they need. Again, the pandemic has revealed in a way that we knew before the pandemic, but we know much more acutely now, that parents can still perform their jobs even if they work from home while caring for small kids, but they oftentimes need the support of employers. They oftentimes need more effective resources through our Office of Workforce Services, our Department of Workforce Services at the state level, in terms of just being able to have what they need to effectively carry out these functions.
One of the things I think we can do, especially when we're looking at intergenerational poverty and we're talking about certain demographics that are definitely falling behind, I would love to see something where we could provide additional support for these parents in areas that are where these students are clearly struggling. The longer we wait to intervene with these students, the more pressure it puts on the system and on the teachers. And so I just think we need to find more direct intervention at an earlier point.
What I believe we need to do now is concentrate as a state, is expanding our investment in those areas where we know we're getting the outcomes that we need, especially given what we've been through with this pandemic. Some of the data suggests that we've lost ground with some of these children. And so I think one of the focuses needs to be in our state moving forward, that we look at how we can help pick up that lost ground, so to speak. But in so doing, look at the value overall for children and for early childhood education. And I think as we do that, and as we review the data and their outcomes, we'll not only look at it as a good investment for helping overcome what we've been through and what they've been through with the pandemic, but also securing their future. The science is pretty clear. We have a window of opportunity with these young children. Take advantage of it to help them with their brain development, and they learn so quickly and so fast. But the door swings both ways. And so when we miss that opportunity too, we're losing out, they're losing out. And so I think the science helps us understand that. And I think my colleagues in the legislature and people in education also more than ever before understand the significance of that opportunity. And I'm hoping that we can take advantage of it and make the proper investment.
As a state, if we deeply care about our economy and we want to see a stronger economy, we really need to invest on 3 pieces of this great puzzle. And that is, we need access to high quality childcare, make sure that all of our kiddos have access to early childhood education and preschool, good high quality preschool, and of course, a universal kindergarten program that makes sure every kid is getting ready as they enter grade school and they start getting stronger in their reading programs and writing. And it's just a foundation that every kid in Utah deserves.
One of the most essential things I think the legislature can do, and hopefully we will continue to focus on this session, is taking care of pre-K. We see when kids come into school, it not only helps them, learn more math and increase their reading scores, but it helps their self-esteem. And so United Way's led in the pre-K effort, and really appreciate what you've done. There's other programs, Upstart and other online programs that have been very, very helpful too. We need to make sure that we use the program that best fits the child. Some kids function very well on online, some don't function as well. They need more brick and mortar help. And we need to continue to make sure that kids are prepared to come to school, because when they are, not only do they do better in math and reading, our scores go up, but their self-esteem, which I think is the most important thing in anybody's life, goes up, and they feel like they're of worth, and they feel like they're someone, and they can actually perform at school, and they begin to love school, which is part of I think really, really important as they go through that process. So I hope the legislature this session continues to focus on pre-K, and again, appreciate your great efforts in leading the way.
So Intermountain Healthcare has 2 demonstration projects going on, one focused in the Ogden area, the other focused in the St. George area. And they're really trying through an investment and a collaboration with people in those communities, kind of focus on zip codes and determine whether or not they can make a difference in health outcomes based on thinking about the social determinants of health. So in some ways, it's thinking about if we provide housing, if we support increased food security, if we have kind of preventative health care, can we make a difference in 2 things, the health outcomes of families and ultimately the cost of health care because they don't develop the kinds of problems that send them to the emergency room, where they're really costly because we haven't done the kind of addressing the early on kind of needs that they have to make sure that they don't have bad health outcomes. I think we need to take what they're learning in those ZipCAG projects and be able to say, are there opportunities for us to make kind of targeted investments that will help support families, that will allow our kids then to make sure they're achieving their learning outcomes, to make sure families have better health outcomes, and that they have more access to family sustaining jobs, which ultimately will help support the entire family.
I think the main thing we need to do, the main policy we need to look at is the community health centers that are in our community, in the underserved communities. How do we expand their capacity? Because we know in our community, a lot of individuals who are going to these healthcare communities, they're not going anywhere else for their healthcare. This is where they're going. This is where they're receiving their physical health. This is where they're receiving their mental health. This is where our women are going and receiving their maternal health. And so I think we need to look at policies on how do we, number one, bring funding back to them, and also how do we expand them in our community. I think they play a major part in our community with providing that service.
One of the real priorities for 2021 should be a focus on evictions and keeping people in their places of housing so we don't have a dramatic increase in homelessness, because we know that being in the house is of course going to be better for the families, especially the children, but homelessness creates a whole nother cycle that also costs the taxpayers a lot of money when it comes to mental health and homeless shelters. We've just invested in 3 new ones, and yet they're already full this winter. So I do think that we ought to be looking at the issues of how we can keep people in their housing. We've had an affordable housing crunch for years, and I expect that's only going to get worse with this recession.
We cannot talk about poor health unless we talk about health disparities and who have access to health care. And I think that needs to be one of the lens as we're looking at policy around healthcare, that we need to look through who have access. I think we need to look at expanding capacity and to those communities that are underserved in the state of Utah. We have a number of communities where individuals are not able to get to healthcare. They're not able to do preventative healthcare. They're not able to address their diabetes or their heart condition or their high blood pressure.
One of the bills that I will be focusing during this next legislative session, it's a bill that addresses healthcare coverage for kids. I think it should be the goal of the state of Utah that all children in our state have access to high quality healthcare coverage. And we have mechanisms to do that, but right now the barriers are big. And we're making it very difficult for our kids to get there. And we know that if we want a kid to focus on education and focus in their education, we need to make sure that they're healthy. It's hard to go to school and concentrate when you're having a toothache, or if something is not okay, with you health-wise. So this is an opportunity. I mean, I think we want to put our money where our mouth is when it comes to family values and valuing children and how important they are for them to be healthy. We know that families also become more healthy when their kids have access to healthcare. So I think there is a great return on investment when we have access to care and healthcare. And in this case, unfortunately in Utah, we've ranked the lowest when it comes to, for example, that our Hispanic Latino kids being covered. Even though they qualified, somehow they're not getting the coverage they need. So this is an opportunity. My bill will be addressing that. We'll be addressing outreach efforts that are significant, that actually will have the outcomes that we need. And I'm excited for that, making sure that more kids get access to care. And I think this pandemic has shown how important it is to have access to quality healthcare.
We've got a lot of work to do to get more of our children insured. We have one of the lowest uninsured rates in the country for children. And we're going to be making a big effort this session to drive that number up to get coverage for those kids.
When we're talking about public health, we need to go not only within the medical field and look at things such as healthcare costs and health insurance, but we need to go outside of that as well. So much impacts our health, so that when we're talking about those root causes, it could be environmental factors such as clean air. It can be other kinds of environmental factors such as systemic racism. It could be food insecurity. It could be unemployment or underemployment. It could be a lack of transportation. It could be educational impacts. I mean, there's so many things that we need to look at. As a policymaker, public health needs to be seen as a larger issue than what has traditionally been defined.
Once you have individuals who are able to provide for themselves and their families, they're going to have greater resources and time to take care of their health, to see their doctors regularly, to address basic conditions that need attention, to provide for preventative health checkups and things like that. So this is all very holistic in the sense that, you know, if you provide such things as reducing or eliminating food insecurity, providing affordable housing, providing greater access to compensation that allows people to quit a second or a third job and be able to spend more time with their families and their kids. Those are basic things that we want for ourselves. And they're basic things that we should want all Utahns to have. And
so thrilled that the public actually passed Amendment G, because I think that'll give more stability to the funding of education, but it also will give more stability to other areas of our state needs to be able to fund those. And we have a lot of opportunities in the state to help people. And I think as you see Amendment G pass, that stability is so important. We actually saw for the first time in a lot of years, income tax actually go down and actually be reduced. Normally, income tax is leading the way, and in sales tax, actually, revenues were higher than income tax. And so as you see the combination of the two and how they interact, to be able to have stability between the two revenue sources, I think not only helps funding education, but helps the other programs that we need to take care of that are so much of a demand for the state to be able to make sure that we fund. And that stability, I think, is what everybody's looking for, because as we have cycles up and down, I think it's hard for anyone to budget.
With the passage of Amendment G by the citizens of this state, we now have the opportunity to put in place a funding framework that we have never had in this state. This really is historic, because what Amendment G did was to trigger House Bill 357. And House Bill 357 put in a funding framework that says, in the base budget, before we fund anything else, we will fund growth in public education. We will fund an inflation factor in public education. We will put money back in an educational stabilization account. That means we're going to be able to keep this commitment in good times and in bad times. And with that, we're going to be able to stabilize, in some ways, a funding source, income tax, which is absolutely the most volatile tax there is. We're going to be able to stabilize it for basic, foundational public education funding. That means we won't have these swings in recession times, which is what has made it so hard for us as a state to continue to grow public education funds in the state of Utah. Which means we are probably the only state in the nation at this point where public education is going to see an increase in revenue. That's historic. and really foundationally will allow us to build a strong public education system with increased funds that are predictable, and that will allow us to have a firm foundational approach to public education funding in the future.
When you talk about educating a child, it's not just what happens in the classroom. We have kids with special needs. We have children that are struggling with different, mental health issues, and they may need additional support. And that actually translates into the classroom. And so one of the things that Amendment G was saying is, look, right now we're really stuck when it comes to what we can use income tax on. And income tax has been by far the fastest growing area of our revenue for the state. But because of the prior constitutional amendment, it made it very difficult for us to do a lot of these other things that we know could make a difference on these students. And so by passing Amendment G, I believe we're going to be able to address these additional things that these kids will need. It actually is going to help our education system because it's going to provide needed resources that we weren't able to provide before due to less funding in our general fund.
The passage of Amendment G is going to be one of the points in time when we really kind of look back and celebrate something significant that we've done for education and education funding in this state. It's really a pivotal moment for us. And I think we've already seen the dividends of that play out. Here in December, we went and appropriated executive appropriations almost $400 million for public education. Normally that conversation would happen later on during the session. And in a time like this where the revenues of the state are really volatile, Amendment G provides a lot more certainty to public education. They actually now know 6-9 months in advance what their budget's going to look like in the upcoming year. And we've never had that kind of certainty for public education before. We've had a revenue system for public education, but we've never had a funding system. And Amendment G provides a real funding system for the state.
I think that moving forward, we're going to continue to see the income tax fund grow faster than the sales tax fund. But with Amendment G, it gives the legislature some flexibility. I know there were a lot of concerns that would translate into lower spending for public education. And I, for one, will be a voice against that. I don't think that that's going to be the result. I think the result will be that the Utah legislature, like the other 49 legislatures, we're going to have the full budget in front of us for options and do things that make sense. So this year, even though we're in a pandemic, I hope that we'll be able to fully fund and even expand some of our programs for children, especially children with disabilities, and for people that are in the most vulnerable population.
We need to make sure that the promises are kept. And I think this year, we're lucky enough because, again, we had this huge influx of federal funds that came and gave us this really good income tax and sales tax, especially sales tax, that came out of all that money that was generated through the federal government, that the stimulus packages that came to every state, including Utah. So this year, we're going to see good money and good investments coming back to education. I worry about the future years, and I will be very vocal about those promises that were made. But I think it's right now. Let's take it. Let's make sure that we are investing where we need. I think our teachers, which now are part of those frontline workers that are risking right now every day under this scenario of this pandemic, their lives basically. We want to make sure that they're getting the adequate resources they need, including their wages. I mean, salaries for teachers are something that we should continue to address. And I'm hoping that, in this case, there's some money for infrastructure, because remember, there's no guarantee we're going to have the same economic scenario if after the federal government starts providing those stimulus, which is something we need to continue talking. So in terms of Amendment G, let's make sure it gets, those promises are met, and I will definitely be keeping an eye on that. I think it's important, and we need to continue investing in our education.
The changes to the state constitution that includes programs for children and programs for people with disabilities will only make a limited amount of revenue be more limited. So the monies that were specifically for education will now need to be delineated also for these other programs, which will reduce that part of the pie. The question is whether the supports that were put in legislation to bolster education will continue from year to year to year. And we're talking not this year, not next year, but what about in 10 years? What about in 20 years or in 50 years? And will education see the negative impacts to that? And will we see it this year? Will we see it next year, in 10 years or 50 years?
Our values, our priorities are reflected in no better way than what we choose to spend our money on. So although money isn't everything, if we choose to remain 50th in the country and how we on per pupil spending for our educational resources, it speaks loudly about what our priorities and values are. So I want to see, I'm going to be advocating for it. Increased spending year after year by legislature after legislature for our kids in public education.
One of the core principles that makes our ability as a legislature to have good outcomes is having a lot of involvement from stakeholders. And this has been a disruptive year in that regard. You know, we were the first state in the country to have a virtual legislative session, and we've learned a lot. We've been at this longer in many cases than any other state, but there's been some room for improvement. And I'm excited because we've got some really good things happening up on Capitol Hill to make our process even more transparent, more inclusive in the future. We've built new committee rooms that are larger. They'll accommodate more people now, and they'll accommodate a lot more people in the future, so more people can come up and get engaged. We, for the first time ever as a state, will be video streaming our committee hearings, which will give people much more access to feel like they're involved in what's happening in our committees. And we'll keep doing those kinds of things to ensure that we have a lot of citizen and stakeholder involvement in the process. The reality is, I think this disruption this year is probably going to move us forward as a state in regards to getting more and more people involved in the process.
Whether it's online or in person, the most important thing is we looked at how we would do this blended legislative session was to allow for that public input. And without it, I think we won't make as good a decision. So that's been a high priority for us to make sure that as we built these new committee rooms and we redesigned the committee rooms that are existing, that we do it in a way that allows for the public to have input, whether they're here or whether they're not, and to make sure that they can participate just like in the past. And I just say that Utah's done some great things. We're noted for being one of the best managed states. We certainly got a great economy. We've done very well at so many different things. And the legislature isn't just the organization that does that. We do it because we have input from stakeholders. And there's so many great stakeholders like United Way and others that give us input and give us the ability to weigh those decisions and to be able to make those. So without that, I think we'd have a very difficult session. And I look forward to be able to use this blended legislative session, maybe as a hybrid, to allow people to have even more access than they've had in the past, because that's what makes the process so great.
I think with technology, we're going to have the opportunity for more people to be involved and more people giving input than ever before. And let me explain. Before, someone would have to take off time from work, find a parking space, which is impossible to do, find the committee room, which is hard to do, and then wait in line to testify. Now people could be sitting at their desk at work or even on vacation somewhere, and they could still testify in a hearing. We've never allowed that before. And I think that through the technology that we have and the capabilities with WebEx, we may find that we have more citizen input than we have had in prior sessions. I agree, though, it's going to be harder to just wait in the hall and grab, your representative by the arm as they're walking by. And so I think it'll be incumbent on people to use email and text messages and personal phone calls more to reach out with their, to their legislators and let them know what their concerns are.
Make sure if you're a constituent that you tell me you're my constituent. And the best way of doing that is give me your physical address. I don't respond to non-constituents with the same kind of feeling of need as I do the need to respond to constituents who are residents of my House district. So you want to get my attention, make sure that you tell me honestly and tell me what your physical address is, that you're my constituent. That's the best way of getting my attention. And I think every legislator would say the same thing.
I would encourage everybody to reach out to your legislator, build a personal relationship. I think you would be surprised at how many legislators hear from very few of their constituents directly. We get a lot of chain emails, we get a lot of things like that. The reality is the most effective way to engage with your legislator is to have a personal relationship. So I would encourage everyone to reach out. If they have a town hall, go. I hear this from many of my legislative colleagues. They'll do a town hall and they'll have 7 or 8 people show up. And to me, that's a huge missed opportunity. Go try to get a chance to get to know them personally. And then when you have an issue that really matters to you, reach out to them. They want to hear from you.
If you want to really talk to me, mail me a letter. We get tons of emails, hundreds and hundreds a day. I can't even go through them, and our staff can't even go through them. If you want me, I open that letter and I look at it, mail it to them. They have to open it and they have to look at it.
On this upcoming legislative session is going to be, it's going to look very different. We still are not sure how much limitations are going to be in terms of people accessing the Capitol itself, but we're encouraging people to continue to use the technology that we've been using during this pandemic. So make sure you use those texts, use that phone and start texting your legislators. Sharing stories through our different social media outlets is critical. And make sure you engage that way. You participate of the meetings. They're going to be online, all of them. We've had already that capacity, and we've been very effective. I think our legislative staff is amazing, and they've done an amazing job. So just continue to be engaged. This is a time to share your stories. Let's make it human. I want to hear from the public and the community and those concerned citizens and constituents of how this affected them, so we can make better decisions and help all of them, not only some.
So the best way to be engaged this year, because there's so many unknowns with this session, is to follow along online. Follow the calendar on the website. That's la.utah.gov. And keep in contact with your legislator. Make sure that you understand how to connect with them, how to get your voice heard, and to get all of your questions answered.
We know that no one can do this alone. We know that it takes all of us. It takes parents and teachers and school leaders and state leaders, nonprofit community members, and all of us working together as a team with a clear focus on creating opportunity for every child. We also know that when we work that way, we can solve big problems together, and we invite you to join us. You can join us by going to uw.org/advocate on the web, signing up for our action alerts or our blog, learning more about the work that we do throughout the year, and committing to join us beyond the 45 days of the coming session. Join us in this ongoing work of creating an inclusive recovery. Again, I'd like to thank our generous sponsors, Chevron, America First Credit Union, and Rocky Mountain Power. We truly appreciate your generosity in making this possible. I'd also like to thank all of the legislators who participated in this and who shared their thoughts and their vision for us. We appreciate all you do to help our state and to help our communities. And I'd like to thank all of you for watching. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for caring about our community, and thank you for engaging with this important work.